Okay, and we're live. Sorry, I haven't done this in a while. I just haven't been feeling up to it. But I got another podcast episode out. That's out right now. And today I've got a Doc Brown. He is a PhD linguist, and he's going to talk to us about language typology and like how they change over time, and how they relate to each other and don't relate to each other, and the like rules for that. And that is very important to culture. It shows us a lot of different stuff. It shows us a lot of different stuff, and it can be used in conjunction with like archaeological remains to reconstruct the past in a very real way and make connections with other things. So yeah, it's very important. I've talked about it a bunch of times. I shouldn't need to go into that whole rant, but yeah, what's up, man? How
Hey,
you
thanks
doing?
for
Did I
having me.
say anything wrong?
No, that's all good. That's yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Was I correct?
yeah,
Accurate?
yeah. Um,
Cool.
yeah. I mean, you can go on. Anyone could go on Wikipedia and read off what typology, language typology means, but that is a very inculturated explanation of how it actually works on the ground. So hopefully, I can fill in those gaps because yeah, we had an interesting exchange. Not you and I so much, but it was on your Twitter thread. I have it up here. This is back on the 6th
I
of
saw it a
July.
little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, there was I had to weigh in. It was all in good. It was all in good fun. There was a little bit of joshing, I think, back and forth between me and another person. Hello, Humanity Hoax at Humanity Hoax. Hello. There was some discussion of whether the I knew.
Well, let me pull it up because we're live
Yeah.
streaming.
Oh yeah,
But
we're live streaming it. Yeah.
yeah, that's what we're gonna talk about. Yeah. In the meantime, welcome. What's
Thank
up?
you.
I also need to post this on the Discord and
Yeah,
stuff.
you do your thing.
But no, I'm gonna pull this conversation up first. I should have had it already.
Oh, you're good.
I wish I knew that you wanted to start with that exact conversation.
Oh, well,
Actually,
I mean, we could
you
start
can pull it
wherever.
up. You pull it up. Can you do that? Like share it, and then I can pull it up on the
I don't
screen.
know if I can share it. I'm a Luddite. I don't know if I have the. I don't want to mess with anything, so I don't.
Okay,
think
well,
yeah. I mean, I can
send me
read
the
it.
link.
I can send you the link. I'll send
Yeah.
you the link and I can read it if that's helpful.
Yeah, read it, but send me the link so it's also
There
visual.
is the link.
God, the
right
people
here.
listening to this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
I
I'm an
feel like
elder
I feel like
I'm a boomer.
what's his name? Yes, a boomer.
I'm a
but
boomer. Not really.
I
but-
feel like on Joe Rogan when
Hey,
they
Jamie,
were
you bring up-
yeah, no, but like when the old guys Dibble and Hancock couldn't
Yeah.
figure out the technology.
Yeah.
Neither of them like
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, we've all had
What's up, Craig?
all academics have had that conference talk where your PowerPoint fails and you're like, okay, as I would have shown you. You have to kind of
Yeah,
start
seriously.
doing tap
every
dancing
time.
in front of the audience to like it's something like this. Yeah.
I'm supposed to be better at this though.
Do you want me to wait? Do you want me to just talk about what we were talking about on the thread, or you want me to just hold on here? Or
Yeah.
yeah. So there was a little cool conversation, and they're talking about Ainu and Basque, and whether Ainu and Basque could potentially be related. And
Which, by the way, this is when I always interject when I'm talking to an actual academic. Is we need to explain what Ainu and Basque are.
yes,
And the
well,
importance.
yeah.
And
so,
actually, I'll let you do that because
Yeah. Okay. I'll do some caveats because I'm an academic and we were always taught to do caveats. So I have a graduate degree in linguistics, historical linguistics specifically. I have done linguistic fieldwork in 2 countries, whatever that's worth. So
or something.
that doesn't make me an
especially
expert
in
on
this context.
everything. I'm definitely not an expert on Ainu or Basque. But Ainu is spoken by the Ainu people. Big surprise. They're the one of the indigenous peoples of Japan. Indigenous here meaning there before Japanese speakers. So Ainu language has been spoken in, I forget which part of Japan, but it's spoken in Japan. It's critically endangered at this stage, but it was there before Japanese speakers arrived. Yamato
Right.
culture, I believe. Yeah. So
And this is also where the Polynesians, what's the word? They came from, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Learning something new already.
Yeah. No. Well, although their culture probably had some similarities because of island dwellers and in climate to a certain extent, but it's not where Polynesian languages originate from. So
Okay.
yeah.
Where do they originate from?
Formosa, Taiwan. We can get all into that.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm sorry. I was talking about Austronesian people, not the Ainu. But we were talking about the Ainu.
Around. Yeah.
Right. So the Polynesians are rooted in Austronesian culture, which the Ainu and Formosa, which is now the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, they're a related Austronesian people.
No,
but
yeah. Ainu is actually a language.
Well, that explains that.
Ainu is actually a language isolate, which was kind of the cool part of this whole discussion, is because Basque and Ainu are both language isolates. And
so Ainu, they're a language isolate within the Austronesian family, or they're not?
No, they're not Austronesian at all.
Okay, so I was wrong. On that part.
On that part.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, which is okay. I don't blame.
No,
them.
I'm glad I now know.
Most people nobody should know as much as I know about this, probably.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I'm not an expert on Ainu. I have done field work on Austronesian languages, though. So that is something I know a little bit about. I know enough to know that Ainu are definitely not Austronesian speaking. They're a language.
Why did I think that?
Island dwellers, probably. I don't know.
I probably just seen it on a map, and they're so close to. Well, they're not really that close together, but really like close. I think I just lump all those islands in.
It's easy to do.
Yeah. Okay, so sorry, nuts and bolts. The relation, the possible relation, and then the Basque are like pre-Indo-European. Yeah, they're pre-Indo-European.
Yeah,
and their language is also an isolate, but they're mostly in Spain on the border with France and a little bit of France. So that's crazy. It wouldn't make any sense, and the connection with the language would that would imply a similar root, which would be crazy, right?
It would be. Okay, so this is what I'll say. Because I have no all the love to humanity hoax. I mean, let's say maybe if they are connected, it's impossible to prove it through language.
Okay.
So I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. I mean, it might be aliens.
Very academic answer.
Yeah. You really can't prove it through the language. And I think, it's interesting because I was doing some searching, and there other people have tried to tie the Ainu and the Basque together through things like common vocabulary. And so I just, I thought I'd chime in on the thread as you have up on the screen and be like, well, that's not really how we show how languages are connected. And, sometimes languages are just isolated and they're just kind of by themselves. And that's okay. I like language isolates. They're fun. But it kind of made me start thinking, and I think actually Humanity Hoax, so thank you for this idea, Humanity Hoax, said, we could set up a space, and then you were saying, well, maybe we just have it as an episode, because Twitter spaces never work right in my experience. So thank you again for hosting. But yeah,
sure thing, man.
How languages
do you want to keep going on this thread, or
we can do that if you like, or we can,
no, it's up to you, man. However you want to do it.
Well, I guess it might just
you can just talk about it. I can pull up images.
Okay. Geez, where to start? So like this is basically a discussion around language typology. And so what language typology, as you've already very nicely introduced the topic, is basically the study of how languages are or are not related, which is kind of a interesting thing. I think I wrote there's some interesting analogs with anthropology. Actually, you have
linguistic anthropology is one of the four main subfields. Linguistics is huge in anthropology. I just don't know as much about it. It's such a big thing that it is very, very connected to culture, but it's actually its own subfield besides socio or sociocultural archaeology or anthropology. They're all one field, but they're called different stuff. Yeah. Craig, the Basque region is in also both France and Spain, but it's mostly in Spain. Historically, the Kingdom of Navarre, which went into a personal union with, I think, Castile before they merged with Aragon. But yeah, I said something else. Language families, not 16th century, 15th century Spanish history.
What we mean by, I guess we'll start with language isolates. What do we mean by language isolates? Because you could say, right, like, well, isn't technically every language isolated from other languages in that it exists on its own? Yes. What pointy-headed linguistic types like me mean is a language that has no modern relatives. So maybe they probably had relatives in the past. There probably were more languages, like the Basque languages. The so-called Vasconic languages are like hypothetical language family, but we only have one surviving member, which is Basque. And so it's really hard to know anything about what the older versions of Basque or any of its ancestors would be like, because there's only one left. It's like the last unicorn. Right. So,
and you can reconstruct past languages like Indo-European from the collection of like dozens of Indo-European languages there are.
yeah. And so one of the ways, so you can get more accurate. Okay. So you can reconstruct like a Proto-Basque, but because it's the only recorded member of its family, it's like impossible to check your work. It's what's super theoretical. And it is one of those things where the more inputs you have in a reconstruction, the more accurate your reconstruction is likely to be. Just like if you think about like a human fossil. I'm trying to find good anthropological or archaeological like analogs here. If you find like a human fossil and it's like this rando person and they have like some weird clothing that's preserved and you've never found anybody like this dressed like this before in this region, and maybe like their bone density shows they were eating a lot of shellfish or something, but you're like, well, there's no shellfish here now, so how is that possible? It's like this random one-off find, hypothetical find. It would be really hard to know anything about their culture because you have one example of them.
Right.
Whereas if you find like an entire graveyard full of like Vikings, you're like, oh, well, we can tell a lot about these guys because they're all buried around the same time period. Maybe it's a battlefield graveyard. Oh, well, we can tell that they probably fought in the same battle even, and we can tell a lot about them because we have all this input, all this data. There's something analogous to linguistic reconstruction. If you have a lot of examples of clearly related languages, you can actually find out a fair amount about what they looked like in previous stages because you have more data to work with. So, yeah.
In my part of New England, the Algonquin people are currently in the process of reconstructing their language.
Which tribe?
Wait, am I? No,
because Algonquin's a language family, so that brings us into language.
Right.
Yeah.
They're reconstructing. That's exactly what stopped me. They're reconstructing one of them, Mohegan. While you keep talking, I'll look it up. But they're reconstructing like Mohegan.
Okay, cool.
Or no, it's not Mohegan because they still have it, I think.
No, not Narragansett.
No. They're reconstructing it with information from Mohegan and Narragansett, and I think Wampanoag. Yeah. No, it's Wampanoag. That's the one they're reconstructing.
Very cool.
Which would be where like Boston is now.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah, but sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, you're good. So I guess that brings us to language families. Indo-European is a language family. We're speaking an Indo-European language right now. So hello to the Yamnaya bros out there. You drink your milk and herd your cattle across the Pontic Caspian steppes, and I don't know. You have wheels and horses. Yeah.
It's my literal type whatever. Keep talking about the language.
You're Celtic, right? You're super Celtic, so you would have strong Yamnaya markers. Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
There actually somebody put up an image of a bell beaker, and it looks strikingly similar to me with much more of a Chad face.
Yeah. they were consuming less seed oils, so it's part of it.
Yes.
100%. Milk is life. Yes. So Proto-Indo-European is the most widespread language family on the planet with the most speakers, although it includes many different languages, historically spoken all the way from Western Europe all the way into northern India, and actually some parts of modern day China, if you include languages like Tocharian. So widespread.
Tocharian.
Yeah, Tocharian, A and B, right? There's two different versions. And so that's one language family. Algonquian is the one that you mentioned. Sadly was a very widespread language family in North America.
Yeah. Because I'm talking about Eastern Algonquins, specifically in New England. There's like 4 or 5 different groups, significant groups spread out throughout the U.S. It's weird.
Even out into modern day Wyoming, you had speakers of Algonquian languages, even out there. So it's very widespread. Languages like Cree.
I'll pull that up in a sec. I'm going to pull up Indo-European.
Yeah.
Cree and Ojibwe.
Ojibwe, I believe. It's not my main area of focus. Yeah, there's just very, very many. Up into modern day Canada as well, huge areas that still speak. I think of all the living Algonquian languages, I believe Cree has the highest number of native speakers if you also include Ojibwe, but some people count those as different languages. So
I would think
dialects, sort of dialects of each other, is my understanding.
Do the Navajo speak multiple languages? I thought the Navajo just had so much and such continuity.
Navajo, I believe, is Athabascan. I think
Oh,
it's Athabascan, as I recall. And Navajo is fascinating because Navajo has some interesting similarities to languages traditionally spoken. We're talking pre-contact here, pre-contact
right.
distribution up into places like Alaska, modern day Yukon territory, British Columbia. So yeah, technically, there's an interesting breaking off that happens, and some people wander south. And language families don't need. I guess what that is to
Oh,
say is,
so
yeah,
the Nadine, is that that's not
non-Dene.
that right?
Yeah, that's a
Is
really
that what you're
big.
talking about?
Yeah, non-Dene. Yeah. I believe Navajo is not an A. Actually, let me double check that because I don't. Again, I am talking way out of my my wheelhouse here, but I believe it
Yeah, we kind of
is.
went off.
It is.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's Dene. Yeah. It's not Dene.
So they're related to these people up in the Yukon and
So
Alaska?
so their languages are related, and this is a good point when
Okay.
you're talking
Oh, the
about language.
Tlingit.
Yeah,
These aren't
Tlingit.
Inuit people.
Well, Inuit are kind of mixed in there, I believe.
Okay.
Inuit speakers
Okay,
are
got
mixed
it.
in. Yeah, those borders are kind of suggestions up there, is my understanding.
Right, right.
So
They'd have
yeah,
to be. I mean,
yeah,
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 nomadic hunters anyway, ish,
yeah.
I think.
Well, that brings it to a good point too when you're talking about language families. Is like we're talking about families of languages. That does not necessarily mean we're talking about the exact
Right.
same group of people.
Right. Absolutely.
You and I
But
are
they could
speak
have a common root, or
could
they
have a
could be something like Anglo-Saxon, which came in and brought in the language, or like Hungary is a great example as well,
yeah.
which is a European ethnic, well, genetically European people, but their language and culture as a result, this culture is very much downstream of language. Getting rid of a culture's language is the best way to make it go away. The conquerors in the past used this all the time. But the English or the Hungarian speakers, that's a Asian culture and language.
Uralic
Or
or
yeah,
yeah.
Uralic. Yeah, yeah,
Uralic. Yeah.
Uralic. I'm not sure how to pronounce it,
Yeah,
but
everyone
yes,
pronounces
that's
it.
what
Are
it
you
is.
British or not? Is the Uralic?
Yeah.
Yeah, Uralic. I don't know.
Oh,
Um,
is that British? I'll start saying it the other way.
well,
But yeah, continue.
true to your Irish roots.
Hmm.
I'll do it the other way. Yeah. So languages, obviously, languages are passed between people, and there has to be cultural continuity to pass a language along. But there's a temptation, and I fall prey to this too. So I have to check myself before I wreck myself. Um, we live in the age of nation states, as you talk a lot about on your show, and there's a temptation to think of, well, I belong to the such and such a group, so I must speak this language and only this language as my primary language. When in pre Westphalian period, it was, and even in modern states, it's pretty common to have large amounts of multilingualism depending on where you are in the world. And group identity, language is part of that for sure, but it's not always like, well, if you're trying to reconstruct the past, well, we're the, like, for anyone who lives on the border between two groups, there's probably going to be a fair amount of multilingualism.
Hmm.
It's similar to if in an American context, if you go down to the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, down near like Brownsville and stuff like that, you're going to get a fair amount of bilingualism, right? Like even the white people down there
Right.
speak Spanish because you kind of have
Yeah.
to.
Right.
You
Right.
would not point to an Anglo-Texan who speaks fluent Spanish and go, "Oh, well, you're Mexican or you're Tejano." No, they're clearly Anglo. They just also speak
Hmm.
this language. So that's just a modern American example of how messy this is when you go back in time, because languages are
Yeah.
passed, they're passed through cultures, but sometimes cultures have multiple languages. And sometimes,
Right.
and there's a lot of,
Right.
like you would say, cultural diffusion too, where there's intermarriage. One great example of this in the North American context is actually in my neck of the woods, Pacific Northwest. If you think about specifically like the modern day Western Washington and Vancouver Island and southwestern British Columbia area,
Yeah. The
um,
Salish Islands.
Salish Sea area, Puget Sound, Strait of Juan de Fuca, all that area out there, the Olympic Peninsula. There, so pre-contact, there was like a metric fuck ton, if we can say that, of different languages spoken in this area,
Yes.
and a lot of them were from completely unrelated language families. And so you would
Hmm.
have it's obviously there were languages within the families, but you'd have a huge amount of coexistence of several different, completely unrelated languages. And because there's a huge amount of intermarriage, and for political reasons and for trade reasons.
Right. That's related to the totem, right?
Yes, to a certain, yes.
Yeah.
So there's a shared, and so you have all these different cultures, different languages. I'm not going to say peacefully coexisting. That might be an
No.
overstatement.
I mean, I've written about this on Twitter. If people are reading my stuff on Twitter, if you're not, that's more content from me, my threads and stuff. The Haida, if you're watching this, I'll probably put this up on the YouTube as well. The Haida up here, they're known as colloquially as the Vikings of the Northwest. Like they were slavers.
Yeah, so the Haida would come down in summer raids to where I'm at, modern day Seattle, and would take captives. Actually,
from the peaceful fishers of the coast salad.
Yeah, well, maybe peaceful.
Peaceful-ish. Peaceful relative to the extremely warlike Haida.
Well,
like
Chief Seattle owned slaves, so I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean,
I forgot that it was the whole region that did this.
Peaceful, relatively speaking, yes. Yeah, so
never I even take back the relatively. I didn't realize that. So thank you for sharing that.
It's very interesting because at some point they renamed King County after Martin Luther King. They switched over, but then the name of the city is still named after somebody who owned slaves, so it's like, what are we doing here? So Seattle's an interesting place. But yeah, so like
something.
It's definitely something. The Haida, by the way, speak a language isolate. So the Haida language is kind of a family unto itself that has one member.
But I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so you had several different language groups. So the Nulchanath group there that you see that on Vancouver Island, you have they're part of a broader language family. Let me double check that and pronounce it. Yeah, the Wakashan language family. Then you have, if you look down a little bit more toward, you have the Coast Salish area there. These are all, and then various other groups, Tlingit up in the north. These are speaking different languages, and some of these languages are from entirely unrelated language families. But what can happen, and this might be of interest to you and your viewers, I hope it is, because it has great, interesting anthropological significance, is that you can get something called a linguistic area. So a linguistic area in German, this is called a Sprachbund, but it's called linguistic area. In English, it was German speakers who kind of first started thinking about this kind of linguistic stuff. So there's some older terms that you'll still hear in German. A linguistic area in American, so you can have unrelated languages that are spoken so close to each other and for so long and so much intermarriage that they can start sharing features.
Got it.
So
okay.
a language. So when we say a language is related to another language, theoretically the Ainu and the Basque, which is a theory. But like if we say, German and English are related to one another, what we mean is they descend from a common ancestor. You can think of it almost like an evolutionary tree. But what you can also get are two languages or more languages. In the case of the Pacific Northwest, many different languages from various unrelated historical lineages that end up sounding similar or having similar features because of just centuries and really millennia of close proximity. So the Pacific Northwest is a great example of a linguistic area. You have most of these languages. I don't want to talk at my ass here. Yes, I think all of these languages have like pretty unique consonant sounds. So they have ejective consonants. It's pretty unique worldwide. So I believe the word for ant, like not the relation to someone, but like the little bug, in Lushootseed, which is one of the Salish languages. It's a traditional language of the Seattle area. I'm going to do my best. So shout out to Tulalip Nation. They did teach me a little bit of it back in the day. Tsat is the word for ant, the little bug. And so you have this like ejective consonants. You can also have words with like a there's all sorts of ejective sounds that you find in Salish languages, but you also find those same sounds all in this area. And so what most linguists have determined is, maybe all of these languages originally had those kind of sounds. It's kind of unlikely they probably all had those sounds, but they've been next to each other for so long that these kind of sounds move across language boundaries. So why do I bring this up? It's just to say that, languages can look and sound similar because they have a common ancestor, but that doesn't always have to be the case, right? It's like if you hang out in a neighborhood, if you're in like a multi-ethnic neighborhood, right? Maybe you start also eating a lot of tamales or something like that, right? Because your neighbors are making tamales, right? Or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Speaking for my neck of the woods. Shout out White Center if anyone knows Seattle. Yeah. Maybe you eat a lot of tamales.
You can find white guys where I live, lots of Puerto Ricans. Not a bad thing. I love Puerto Ricans. Like bumping reggaeton where I live. Like it's a real thing.
Yeah. So that would be right. That would be in anthropology. I believe you would call that cultural diffusion. You can have linguistic diffusion as well. So that's
diffusion would be the opposite. I think.
Would it be the
maybe,
opposite? Okay.
Maybe it's both, but I don't remember. Okay, we won't say that.
My reach is farther than my grasp, but that's
okay.
But you see what I'm saying. So like this is why typology is so tricky, is because sometimes you can have languages that look, or maybe we'll say sound very similar, but does that mean they're necessarily historically related in the sense of they come out of a common ancestor? That is tricky.
Right. Yeah. So how do you make that distinction? And it's kind of impossible to check your work. And then how do you decide how big of a difference is like a language family versus something larger? Because obviously, I mean, maybe there wasn't one original tongue. We don't really know. There's no way to know. But like, there's got to be language families that are then related to themselves a little bit, right? You get what I'm saying?
Yes. May I send you a link as an example?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a super complex. So how we determine languages are related to each other is super complex. People have spent their whole careers on this. So I will do my best to give you the greatest hits explanation of this with a lot of examples, because otherwise we'll get lost in the weeds and it probably won't be so fun. So English, the language I'm speaking, theoretically, I try to speak it most days, is an Indo-European language. Great, but there's so many different Indo-European languages. I could be speaking Hindi right now, and technically we'd be part of the same broader language family. That's not helpful, right? Or it's not helpful in what I'm trying to tell you here. So there's different subgroupings within language families, oftentimes, if it's a big enough family, right? If it's Basque, we only have one example of it left, and so you're kind of like, well, Basque is part of Basque, and it's there in the mountains, and it's great, and they make wonderful cheese, but we don't know what the broader family would have looked like. If you have something like English, which is part of the Germanic language family, you can see several different languages that bear striking resemblance to one another. So I sent you what we call a Swadesh list. This is named after Morris Swadesh, who was a famous American linguist, actually worked on a lot of Native American languages, recording them before they died. He sort of got in there right as the US government had finished basically killing them. Swadesh and some others like Edward Sapir, go in and try to, talk to people who still spoke various dying languages. He developed this thing called the Swadesh list. So this is sort of a list of common vocabulary. So one of the ways that you can attempt to prove that two languages are related is through common vocabulary. Now, this is not always a foolproof way of doing this, but it's one of the many tools at our disposal. So if you look at this list here between English and Dutch, Dutch is a Germanic language, so is English. Of all major spoken languages, Dutch is the closest to English. Technically, Frisian is closer, but nobody knows about Frisian, so I chose Dutch.
Right.
So if we look at basic vocabulary,
like related to Dutch, it would have been spoken there until like the 19th century when they squashed all the minor languages in Europe.
Yes.
Through the process of the nation state.
Well, Frisian still is. It has a status as a minority language in the Netherlands, and so we hope.
Yeah, that means a whole lot.
Yeah, it's not much. Yeah,
it shows that it needs to be protected. Is what that means to me. I mean,
yeah, pretty much.
It wouldn't need a special status or anything. Maybe not in that case, but yeah.
I hear what you're saying. No, it's similar to Hawaiian in Hawaii, right? There's a reason why they give it the special status. In any case,
yeah,
Dutch,
it's probably a little bit worse in the Hawaiian case, but yeah.
Yes, it is worse in the Hawaiian case, unfortunately. Yeah. We'll talk about Hawaiian in a few seconds here. So if we look at English and Dutch, we look at some basic vocabulary here. So like pronouns, question words. Okay. So the word for English, I, is ik in Dutch. Okay. Maybe the ik doesn't sound super similar, except have you ever wondered why the English word I is spelled with an I and not AI?
No, but
because it used to be pronounced. because it used to be pronounced e,
Mm,
and it actually
okay.
used to be pronounced ich.
Okay, I knew that.
We can see this from textual evidence. So ich in Old English, ik in Dutch, modern English, I, ik. Okay, maybe not the most convincing. If that was the only word that sounded the same, we'd be like, hey, maybe it's chance. That can happen. I have a whole fun example about that. But let's look at the word for
But you're
you.
going to look at a bunch of words to then form
Yes.
it based on the sum of the evidence, which
You
is
wanna
why
look
it's
at a
harder when there's a language isolate, which has nothing
Yes.
to compare it to.
There's nothing to compare it to. But we got a lot of words. You, the singular form, jij or je in Dutch. Okay, that is very similar. He, hij. Okay, we, wij. Okay, you plural, jullie. Okay, it's kind of like you. They, zij. All right. This, either you have deze or dit. That, die or dat. Dot in particular. Dot sounds a lot like that. And that is weird if that is random. That is a weird coincidence if that is random. We're hitting so many similarities here. Here, hier. Okay. There, daar. That is weird. This is right. If wie or who, wie, what, wat.
That makes sense. That sounds like a pirate saying it. Dar.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and Dutch has a funny R, but you can like it just keeps going. Not, niet, all, or alle. I mean, it just so you can just keep going through the Swadesh list, and you can think these are the numbers. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's they even sound almost the same, right? Like, so basically, the common vocabulary is one of the ways that we can establish common ancestry. Now, that doesn't tell us anything about what that common ancestor looked like. To do that, we would have to do the reconstruction. But you can look at modern languages, and I picked the example of Dutch just because it strikes you it hits you in the face as an English speaker. This sounds like you said like weird English. I mean, like the example I always use for students is like to say I drink water in Dutch is ik drink water. Ik drink water. Okay, well that I drink water. Ik drink water. Those might be related languages, right? You can even, to a certain extent, as an English speaker, knowing no Dutch, understand some of it. So mutual intelligibility, or at least partial mutual intelligibility, is a big, bells and whistles kind of thing. These languages might be related. Spoiler, they totally are. And so, I give Dutch as just one example. So that's part of it, right? Using modern languages, you can attempt to find similarities. Then you would to really find the root of these. You would do a series of reconstructions, which people have already done, and that's a whole other discussion. It's probably not as exciting as talking about, the stuff we're talking about. But the way you look for sound similarities, over time, certain sounds are going to change statistically more likely a certain way,
Right.
and you can use things like that to help suss out really what's going on there. We have an advantage with European languages in that we have a long, relatively speaking, a longer history of textual transmission, and they tend to be in alphabet writing systems. So this is helpful for linguists in reconstructing what we call proto-forms. So English and Dutch both come from Proto-Germanic. It's language spoken about 2,500 years ago, probably somewhere around Sweden or so. And
in this case, we actually have text of like early English and Middle English and stuff, which actually I think is much more similar to this.
Yes. If you look at earlier forms of English, particularly Old English, look a lot more like Dutch or German. Just because you didn't have, so it brings us to the next maybe reason why languages can look similar. I mean, we have a lot of words in English that are actually French, and that's not just random. There's a reason for that. There was this little thing called the Norman invasion. Some of us are still angry about that. So Normans invade, England, take over the rule. They essentially become the ruling class speaking Norman French. And there's a certain limited level of bilingualism going on there, where Norman French is the prestige variety. And so we get words like, pig if the animal's alive, pork if you're eating it. It's a cow if the animal's alive. It's beef if you're eating it. And
so the beef comes from the Norman language, whereas the cow comes from the peasant, Germanic, right?
Yeah. And so that's
was Norman? No, it's French.
it was a
even though they're
medieval
Vikings.
variety of French. Yeah, it was
Right.
medieval variety of French. Yeah. So that's an example of language contact. And yes, I am also angry about 1066. He is not the conqueror. He is the bastard.
I'm more angry about 1256, which is the Norman invasion of Ireland.
Yeah, they kind of messed with everyone. So
they did.
No, they really did.
They're Viking
very bad
people.
They're very bad people. They were not sending their best.
They really weren't.
They were
the best
really
of something.
Yeah.
The Haida of Europe. It's funny, reverse that. Instead of the Vikings of the Northwest, they're the Haida of Europe. I'm going to call them that from now on.
The Haida of Europe.
The Vikings are the Haida of Europe.
Hell yeah. Fucking do it. So
people are going to think I'm being woke doing that, but I just think
exactly.
Yeah. Why can't the Haida be the main one? Why's it got to be a comparison to the big white guys? Sorry, continue.
No, you're good. I've seen some Haida war canoes that are at the University of Washington. They're terrifying. Just the awesome. Implements of war are terrifying. So I can't imagine what it was like to have somebody screaming at you with that, running at you. I would not really want to have to deal with that. So
no, dude, and in like scary wooden armor, like crazy. Yeah.
It's
that have a reputation already.
Yes. Yeah. It's
like they're going to be running for the hills.
Oh yeah, get the heck out of Dodge on that one. Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. So anyhow, you can have English has a lot of we've borrowed a lot of words from French. So you can have, that's another way that you can get, why you can have similar words meaning the same thing. These are called cognates in different languages that are not either closely related. In the case of English and French, we're distantly related but not closely, but we've borrowed a lot of words directly. Or you can have, there's a lot of words like taxi, computer, TV. These kind of technological words from English tend to get borrowed into many world languages.
Right, computadora.
Just because you say taxi or taxi in Tagalog in the Philippines does not mean that Tagalog is related to English. It just means they've gotten the word taxi from English. Right.
Yeah. And the French made up their own word because they wanted to be different.
Yeah, the French are notorious for this. So,
I do view it as a positive thing overall because they do care a lot about preserving their culture, which is a rarity in the West, besides in France and Ireland and Finland and farther east.
Agreed. Well, the real question is whether anybody in France actually uses those made-up terms, or whether they just use the
right.
Iceland, which is I know a little bit more about Iceland than I do France, at least in terms of the language policy. Iceland has a very they have a group of learned scholars who are wonderful people, but they make all these these words, and they for modern implements, modern things. And a great example is the Icelandic word for computer is tölva, which is a combination of the word for female prophetess and number. Because computers are kind of like oracles in a way, and they use numbers to tell you things from beyond. So
I love that, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And that's a cool word. Do they actually use it though?
Yeah, they that one I think they actually do, from what I've gathered. But there's a lot of other words that have been borrowed into Icelandic that are not originally Icelandic, or they've repurposed Icelandic words. I think I'm allowed to swear here. So there's
no C words.
Yeah, there's a foka. So you'll hear Icelanders say "a foka með mér," don't fuck with me. But foka,
they have a funny accent. Yeah, even though they're physically terrifying, I don't think I'd be able to take one seriously.
I love Icelandic is one of my favorite languages. It's so beautiful.
It's a cool language.
Language of poetry, the language of skaldic bards and everything. Yeah. But so in Iceland, they do create a lot of new words, but then it's are the kids really using them, or are the kids just using the cool English words to sound real cool because it's what the TikTok says? That's always a struggle when you're trying to plan a language. It's difficult.
Now that is cultural diffusion.
There you go. Okay, I got it. Okay, so there you go. Thank you. Correct me. I will acknowledge my historical ignorance.
What you said might have also been cultural diffusion. I'm not sure, and I don't care enough to look it up right now.
I only think in language, so I'm too autistic like this. But yeah. So you can get language contact as well. Obviously, English had a fair amount of contact with French, and it changed. It gave us a lot of words. And you can see that. and so that's another way that languages can kind of sound or look the same. Does that mean that, like, English is necessarily directly related to French? No, we're sort of cousins on a different track of the language family, in that French comes out of Romance, and English comes out of Germanic, which are both ultimately, if you go back
But
far enough.
what creates that root, right? Like, what's the obviously they both come from
Yeah,
Proto-Indo-European, but
way back
like,
in the day. Yeah.
but what is the level of distinction where they're deciding, oh, they're in a language family together, whereas the Romance languages like Italian
Mhm.
and uh, not Greek, Italian,
Not Greek. Yeah.
Albanian, Spanish, French.
The Greeks just called
Um,
you Malaka for saying that. Yeah.
yeah, they
So,
did. I grew
yeah.
up around a lot of Greeks were in Italians where I'm from as well,
Yeah.
and Irish, but usually older, like a lot of Italian and Greek people who still spoke Greek, mostly Greek. But sorry, continue. I
No,
heard
yes.
Malacca a lot at the pizza
Yeah,
place
yeah.
I went to growing up.
um, I had Greek family friends growing up, so yes, I also got some of that. Yeah, so the subdivisions of the family, how does that happen? Very good question. Distance, so physical distance, or physical impediment. So if you have a group of people that are either there's just like, maybe it's all flat and easily passable plains, but it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. Okay, you
Right.
can't like
Over
pop
time, the
over
language will
time.
change.
You can also have
Yeah.
groups of people living relatively close to one another, but with a huge amount of either distinction within their language family, or in the case of Pacific Northwest, radically different language families, or something that you've also talked about on your show, an extreme example like Papua New Guinea, or the island of New Guinea in general, where you have
Mhm.
so many mountains, and humans have been there for so long, so many mountains, rivers, difficult to pass terrain, that you get like radically different languages spoken right next to each other.
Right. And it's also a huge place that doesn't have a lot of political complexity. So just the physical area is larger than you would even think. And yes, like you said, there's all these other physical barriers, but they're also never like the reason Indo-European spread so far is because of the how far that the technology, the military
Technology,
technology
for
that
sure.
allowed them to perpetuate their culture and spread it out. Whereas in Papua New Guinea, there's been much lower level of political complexity. We don't normally like to, talk about it in the sense of less because culture is not a linear thing, but at the same time, it's like you can put a number on the level of people the largest political organization was able to rule over and to organize. Like that is a non-arbitrarily different level of political complexity. But sorry, continue. I'm going to pull
No,
up
no,
a
no.
map
Well,
of the
yeah. So
language.
I mean, this is obviously really, really intricate how this happens, but that is essentially what happens: is people who move somewhere else, or go, for various reasons. Why that is it because there's no more food, or is it just we're tired of you people, we're going to leave and we're going to go start our own thing, kind of like Bender from Futurama. I'm gonna
Which
have my
was
own.
people were
Yeah.
much more able to do that in the past, and they're bringing hookers and blackjack. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Glad you got the reference. There is
absolutely.
also sometimes like, we're just tired of you. We're going to go do this thing away and stay away from you, and we're going to set
Mhm.
ourselves off from you as much as possible, because that can also, you know cultural contact can make languages sometimes more similar, but sometimes they can actually make them less similar if there's sort of a traditional enemy situation going on, right? We
Mm.
don't want to act like those people over there. We don't want to sound like those people over there. Let's differentiate ourselves as much as possible. That can also
Mm.
happen too. I mean, humans are known
Okay.
to disagree about all kinds of things. Um, I mean, I think so yeah, Indo-European had this great technology of the wheel and the horse and the cow, and you can move your food around with you. It turns grass into milk and meat, and that is great. The horse also moves the things around with you for you on the wheeled wagons and things like
Yeah.
that. That is awesome if you're in
Are
Pontic Caspian steppe area. So
are you referencing the horse, the wheel, and language, which is a pretty great
yes,
pop-ish anthropology
pop-ish.
book?
Yeah, or
Pop-ish. It's really
also
good.
Mallory's In Search of the Indo-Europeans from '89,
Okay.
I think that is. Yeah, so there's that one too. That one's a little bit more pointy headed, but yes.
The horse, the wheel language, if you listen to the show and you understand like the more nuanced anthropology stuff, you'll be able to read that book just fine, even if you're not like too academically minded.
It's written
I
for
think.
normal people. It's pretty
Right.
They do a pretty good job of
By anthropologists though, not like a
yes,
journalist
yes,
or something,
yeah,
not
yeah.
like just a writer, by anthropologists. But yeah, it's not too dense if I remember. And it's a great book about the history, how the technology moves the language and the relation between those things.
So a language that is completely unrelated historically to Indo-European, but has a similar kind of, I don't want to say similar history, but the history's rhyme is Austronesian. So Austronesian is the second most widespread language family on the planet, next to Indo-European, which means that
Over area.
Over area, yes, not in terms
Yeah.
of speakers, but in terms of area. Yes, obviously not in terms of speakers, but in terms of area is Austronesian. This includes all sorts of languages, like you got Malagasy and Madagascar out in the west, and then in the far east you have like Hawaiian and Rapa Nui. So that's, I forget how many thousands of miles of distance that is. It's several thousand miles. It's a lot.
It's more than several thousand. It's like 10,000.
Yeah, it's like
I'm gonna grab it in a second, but I think it's like 10,000.
It's something like that. Yeah. What allows them to spread? Well, technology, boats, right? Hop on a boat and go to another island. Go check out a new area.
And these are specific to specific cultures. This is what I mean when I'm talking about, if you haven't heard me say this before, which if you've been watching this, you have, but the non-linear nature of it. That's what I'm talking about. Like, it's not, you don't progress in a linear sense from one thing to the next thing. It's based on your own culture and your own physical surroundings. Like the Mayans and the Aztecs, no one's going to argue they weren't advanced, but they didn't have the wheel. They didn't need the wheel because they didn't have pack animals. And in the archaeological record, what you find is that the wheel shows up only at the same time as the domestication of animals, because that's the only reason you could use it. But yes, continue. And metalworking, they had obsidian. They just chose different stuff. That's fine. It's non-linear. It doesn't mean they're less than. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, it'd be different. Well, and you can speak better to this than I ever could. But different cultures, whether they actively make the decision or not, there's sort of decisions that are made about how are we going to, build, how are we going to base our lifestyle? Like, how are we going to get food? Okay, so we're going to make these, at some point decisions are made collectively, and then that affects how that civilization progresses or doesn't, depending on how history treats them.
And there's incentives and disincentives to deal with that.
Right. Yeah. So like the Austronesian speaking peoples, they start out, there you go. Great. Yeah. Great. Wonderful map. Start out on the island. So the languages themselves start out on the Isle of Formosa, aka Taiwan, what is now known as Taiwan. So to this day, there's a handful of Formosan languages, and they are still spoken, unfortunately in decline. I believe, right. Is it Hokkien variety of Chinese is the most widely spoken in Taiwan? I believe that is correct. Don't quote me on that. I think it's Hokkien. A very Sinophonic society, very, very Chinese based society in terms of language. There are some indigenous peoples in Taiwan that still speak Formosan languages. Unfortunately, they're kind of, I hope they survive the next 100 years. I really do. We'll see.
A lot of languages, like most languages in the world right now, are endangered, unfortunately.
Yeah. So from Formosa, over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the languages spread. And so in the case of Austronesian, and this is I have actually done some field work, linguistic field work on an endangered Austronesian language, so I can speak, I guess, a little bit to this one. I mean, in this case, you're hopping on boats and you're going to different islands. So this is a perfect kind of environment for linguistic diffusion and change over time. Even in one isolated community, the language will change over time. I mean, a great example of this is if you talk to your grandparents. Hopefully people, still have grandparents or got to meet their grandparents, right? And you would probably notice that even if your language, or rather, if your family only spoke one language, you probably spoke differently than your grandparents, right? The kids these days with these words, and they're saying the things, and I don't understand. So that's within 2 generations, you get some linguistic changes already happening. Imagine that times like 1,000-fold, right? How much a
Right.
language can change over time. That's just if
And
you're
with a
speaking.
less globalized world, because the
Right.
technology level, like your technological communication capabilities, like your technology and communication, the amount of people you can reach, like mass media, TV media is huge even after the 19th century, which had its own massive shift with all these minority languages mostly going away in Europe, like Scots, Florentian, things like that, everywhere
Yeah.
in Europe. But like the mass media today is that on another level when
Well,
you have kids in Myanmar who are watching English TikToks.
yeah. Well, and media always homogenizes languages. So that's part of it too, is actually people are sounding more similar today than they used to.
Right.
And yeah, and so that's also sadly tied to language death and the gray goo of modernity and just, making everyone the same.
Yep. The 5-in-1 building, but for literally everything. It's the homogenization of everything, which is what we talk about a lot here. The homogenization of everything.
Yeah. But Austronesian is getting spread across islands, and some of them are like hundreds, if not thousands of miles apart. So this is kind of a perfect, like I said, environment for language change. But it is interesting. Let me find a link here. 1 second. I have it somewhere. It is interesting how relatively 1 second. Austronesian Swadesh list. It's interesting how relatively similar they still are, even though they're so widely sort of the geographical dispersion is quite extreme. 1 second. I had the link and then I lost the link. I got excited about Haida. Here we go.
Haida, the
yeah.
the like they're the damn it. I'm gonna say it backwards. But I can't from this.
You can't. The Vikings are the Haida of Europe. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just sent you a link here if you're interested. There's a so you can do Swadesh lists, from like comparing English to whatever language you're looking at, but you can also do them across different languages to kind of attempt to find similarities in core vocabulary. And so you can see in Austronesian languages, I mean, there's huge amounts of similarities even across a lot of both time and spatial distance. And so that's interesting, right? And
Yeah.
because of this, we being linguists in general, it's not like me, I'm doing part of it, but it's everyone, can reconstruct a Proto-Austronesian. And because of comparing that reconstructed Proto-Austronesian to various languages, such as the Formosan languages, the indigenous language of Taiwan, you can pretty conclusively state that these languages must have originated on that island and then spread. And then obviously you can bring in all the kind of more anthropology stuff too, common lifeways, similarities in myths, various, boat building technology and all that kind of stuff that I really can't speak to. I can only just speak to the language. But yeah, so yeah. So but yeah, Austronesian is interesting because it's so the Indo-Europeans are using horses and cows, and they're big on milk, right? They're big on milk. But this thought crossed my mind the other day, is that the Austronesians have coconut milk, and they're big on boats. And so there's an interesting kind of they're different stories, and they're obviously not related language families, but there's a kind of a rhyming that happens, a historical rhyming. They're
using the boats to colonize like they would use horses across like a watery plain instead of just plains, steppes.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So half my family, I also have a great love for Austronesian because half my family.
Wait, and another thing, they're also coming like with their package of foods, like they're moving when they colonize new islands, pigs, chickens, the starch is the yams.
Taro.
Yeah.
You got to have poi to go to Hawaii. You know what the Hawaiians will say? There's a lot of poi makes a big boy. I had a Hawaiian tell me that once.
Dude, I love Polynesian culture. I'm going back to Hawaii later this year.
Which island?
I'm hoping to find the main one, Hawaii.
Main one.
I'm hoping to find this guy. I met this dude. And sorry, then we'll well, I want to talk
No,
about the Austronesian thing you're talking about.
Yeah. This is Hawaiian is an Austronesian language. It works.
Right. I want to find this guy again because I'm not only am I into Polynesian culture, but I'm also into like maritime archaeology in general.
Yeah.
And I made a Algonquin dugout canoe, which is a 12-foot pine log. It was a whole lot of work. But with that, like I met this random dude who just told me about a bird, like on Waikiki Beach. He was just hanging out, this Polynesian guy. And he was like, he had his bus there. He told me his whole life story. I loved it. I was there. It was the morning I left. I was just going for a swim in the ocean before I left. But I want to find that guy again. I should have got his contact information, but I was like, I was spending more time with him while I was late to leave for the airport with my family because I just wanted to talk to him. But yeah, he told me about, dude, like in the 60s, how Waikiki was, and like with people building grass huts on the beach, like in traditional methods, you're not allowed, like, you can't do that on commercial property now, obviously. And like people making surfboards. And he told me about making a outrigger canoe from stolen from construction sites, the materials, like making the tar out of the stuff they put on the sides of houses. I forget what it's called right now. Doesn't matter, but yeah, it was a really
from
cool.
The creosote plant? No, not that.
No, no, this is like what you get at Home Depot, what we'd use today.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
But that's how we'd make it, and like bend the sheet metal and stuff.
Oh wow.
But yeah, Austronesian languages.
Oh yeah. So Hawaiian is an Austronesian language. I believe it's on that list there. It should be because it's one of the farthest. It's one of the farthest eastern Austronesian languages spoken. But yeah, like half my family speaks an Austronesian language. So I have a great affinity for it. Cebuano. So I got half my family's in the Philippines, and so they speak Cebuano. But
I think nobody would guess that because you sound so American. So to have like,
yeah. So I'm American.
Obviously you're American.
Yeah, I'm American,
but
yeah. So half my family's Filipino, and Maki estoy ako gamay Bisaya, pero gamay lang. I can only speak a little. I speak a tiny bit.
You've even got the connotation down though.
Yeah, I mean,
which
you don't get good prices on mangoes at the market if you don't try hard, right? You gotta put effort into it. Then you get the better prices. It's how it works.
That's what I want, the better prices on. I love mangoes.
Yeah.
But what I mean by that, by the way, before we keep going, is like usually when people are like, if they still have family in the other place, it's like one or two generations in, so they might have like more of the other thing. But you sound like American as hell.
Well, I am. Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I have a Texan Filipino family.
Right. Oh, the best kind. That's my favorite kind of Filipino.
Texapinos, I guess. Texapinos.
Texapinos. Oh God.
Something like that. Yeah. So yeah, but like, I mean, I'm in constant contact with family. Like I help manage like family properties and stuff over there. So
oh, nice.
Yeah. So we run our own. We're we have our own kind of trans-Pacific empire. Not really empire.
In the Philippines is a country that has long-standing historical connections to the United States.
Part of America.
Right.
And Filipinos and Americans died together to take the islands back from the Japanese. So there's a lot of that memory is very strong in the Philippines. Right.
It's huge. Yeah. And I've always had a lot of interactions with Filipino people because my dad worked there for a while. It's
what
huge.
Part?
I don't know. A long time. Yeah, it's a massive archipelago, but I don't know. He also works in Thailand. He loves Thai and Filipino people.
They're pretty awesome. Yeah, but I'm biased. Yeah, so like half my family speaks. Obviously, they speak English as well. And my Cebuano is not good enough to really have like a complex conversation. Unfortunately, I put my skill points into other languages as I was going through graduate school and stuff. But but they speak Cebuano, which you can see there on the list. And that's that's one of the major languages of the southern Philippines. It's kind of like the lingua franca of the southern Philippines. But the island where they live, shout out Camiguin province. Actually there is an indigenous language on that island called Kinamigan. And so some years ago I actually went sort of on like a family trip, but I was also in graduate school, so I worked in I did the whole IRB fieldwork thing, and I was actually recording people who still spoke Kinamigan, which is the original language of the island, which is pretty cool. But it was noticeable, like even as I was just talking to them, I was basically asking them to give me a Swadesh list. is essentially what I was doing, right? Like give me basic vocabulary. So I would say a word and they all spoke English. So I would say a word in English and they would say it to me in Kinnamigan. But it was interesting. It's actually probably not even listed on that map. It's such a small little tiny little. So if you scroll down or if you zoom into that, so Mindanao's in the south there. If you make it a little bit bigger, if you keep scrolling down, you go to the right. So if you go a little bit east, and if you move your cursor, I guess up, slightly up, and then to the right, you'll see that little island off the big island. Yep, Bing. Nope, that one. That's Kinnamigan. So that's Kinnamigan province. So it's usually mapped. I think this map says it's
Kalinga?
That is not accurate.
Chavacano?
That is not accurate. Who made this? I did not send. To be fair, I did not send you this map. That is wrong.
No. I found it on the internet.
Yeah. So most people on the island speak Cebuano, but to tie it back into our discussion of language,
I think this is just by like province or whatever region they have broken up. So it probably is just connected to this, unless it's its own thing.
That's not accurate at all. So most people on the island speak Cebuano, but there's this other, original language, Kinnamigan, that is still.
This is from DeviantArt. I should be more careful about what I'm clicking on.
So I actually got to record a language that's pretty much on its way out. I mean, even the people that I was talking to when I was doing the field work, I didn't, obviously as a field worker, you never correct people. It's not your job to correct anyone. You just record and you just say, that's interesting. Thank you so much. Salamat po. And, you thank them nicely for what they've said to you. And, and then you eat some chicken together and you drink some San Miguel beers and you have a great time in the Philippines. But I could tell that even as I was running them through just a basic vocabulary, that they were already kind of mixing in Cebuano into their Kinnamigan. And that's what happens, right? When languages die, is that if they're not absolutely exterminated in one blow, which can happen, they tend to kind of fizzle out, or they'll kind of fizzle out with some admixture from the surrounding bigger language, which is what is happening in Kinnamigan. So anyhow, Austronesian, it's a fascinating language family. It includes all the languages of the Philippines, languages of Indonesia, at least a lot of Indonesian languages. I think you might have some
the biggest ones, like Javan, and Bahasa Indonesian, like Indonesian language. The standardized one is like Malaysian. It's almost the same. They're mutually intelligible.
That's my understanding. Like, and I
actually used to live in Indonesia.
That's why I bring it up.
Right.
Yeah. So, so Malaysian, that sort of Malaysian / Indonesian, again, even now, and then you get all the Polynesian languages too. So Maori, Samoan, Tongan, all of those. So, but yeah, so in terms of, both Austronesian and Indo-European, widely spread languages, how can we possibly point to them being connected historically? We can see this in the words themselves and how the sounds have changed over time. But, also linguists don't primarily go to physical culture as the major argumentation, because we're thinking more about the words themselves and the grammatical structures and the lexicon. But I mean, we would be stupid if we didn't think about physical culture as well. I mean, obviously that's part of it, right? Like I said, languages are always passed from person to person. You don't have linguistic transmission if you don't have cultural transmission across time. So yeah. Anywho,
this map's coming up weird, but yeah,
it is weird. This is psychedelic. It's like what happens if you go out to the hills of Mindanao and you take some stuff from the shamans. You get visions like that. Yeah, I have not done that, but there are still shamans. Yeah,
I'm sure there are. I don't know a lot about their folk religions there, but the people in the major cities are all Catholic, and
so so Catholicism is blended quite seamlessly with what the Filipinos believe.
Right.
And so
that was the good thing about Catholicism forever. Yeah. Catholicism contained with it local traditions of everywhere. There was actually, sorry to go off track again, but this is very relevant. Yeah. In the 1500s in Cornwall, where which is a part of England. It's a part of England, part of the United Kingdom, but it's historically a Celtic area. And up until recently, they still spoke a Celtic language and they've revived it. That's good to hear.
They rebooted it from dead. They gave it like a massive EpiPen shot to the heart and shocked it with like however many volts. And there's a Cornish
EpiPen full of Scottish and Irish, I assume.
No, well, I mean, there was a lot of written Cornish, and so using
okay.
linguistic magic as we do, you can
And probably closer to Welsh anyway.
closer to Welsh, yeah, and
Yeah.
Manx, and so you can
I don't know. Oh, yeah, Manx. Okay.
Manx, you
From
can
the Isle of Man.
Isle of Man. You can do a lot of reconstructions of how it might have been pronounced. Cornish, as it's spoken now, is definitely not how it sounded back in the day, but that's fine because it probably would have changed over time anyhow. It just had a little bit of a blip in its transmission. You can bring it back. You can do it
Yeah.
if you will it, dude. It is no dream, and that's another language that was revived is Hebrew, right? Regardless of your opinions on that, Hebrew was revived as an everyday language. So you can do it. I mean, it's doable. It's hard,
Right.
but you can do it.
But and there's often efforts to right now it's possible to do it, but there were efforts to in England. Some of this just happened naturally from economics, the language not being useful, which is true in a lot of cases. But in Cornwall, they were in the 1500s when Francis Drake was there. His father was like a petty lord or like a retainer of a lord, and he was in the middle of this because he was not Catholic. He was Protestant and Anglo, and he was put there. That's not where his family's from. His family wasn't Cornish. But he had to leave. Francis Drake's family had to leave because the Cornish were rebelling because there was an attack on Catholicism, which to them, this was explicitly stated when I read this, that it was because the Catholic religion held their traditional ancestral culture in it. Like the saints are like the old gods and stuff like that, which is true in Ireland as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair amount of syncretism, and you get, like I said, you get the same thing or something very similar in the Philippines. I mean, very, very similar. Yeah, I mean, like where my family lives in Camiguin province, people don't see themselves as being anything other than devout Catholics because they are devout Catholic. Like at least everyone I met was,
Right.
but they're doing Catholicism in a very Filipino way that is different from American Catholics who are.
And it's the same thing in mine territory. It's the same thing everywhere. I mean, Irish Catholics are different than other Catholics as well.
Right, and like in Ireland, the little people were allowed to coexist, right, alongside Christianity. There were still the little people, the mound dwellers, and in the Philippines, at least where my family lives, which is, to be fair, more in the sticks. It's a pretty rural place. You have all sorts of spooks and goblin-y type things that run around in that people will tell you to be careful for. Watch out for aswang, watch out for the vampire witches. They'll get you if you go out at night. And so yeah, I mean that is how it is. I mean, religions are always enculturated into their new context. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which is cool.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. But languages, we got off base, but it's all related.
Yeah, sorry.
So it's all good. No, it's my fault.
Well, I guess maybe I one maybe nice kind of final point that might assuage some frustration on some people's part, because you can find words in radically different languages that kind of mean the same thing and almost sound the same. And so you should, to be fair, you should always ask the question, could these be related? Maybe it is kind of a taxi situation. And by that, I mean like these so-called wander words, where they kind of wander around through languages. The word itself, wine, is a wander word. It's difficult to know exactly where the word wine comes from because you find it in all these different languages. It's difficult to reconstruct where it really comes from. I believe the word cat is also a wander word. Difficult to know exactly where cat originates from. You can see how different languages get it from other languages, but where it actually comes from is difficult, kind of lost to time. So that can sometimes be the case. You could have a wander word. But sometimes you just get, and this is like totally not satisfying, because in the end, maybe it is just aliens. But again, linguistics can't tell us whether it's aliens or not. So sometimes you just get chance similarities. So there's a language that sadly, again, this is just, sorry to be so depressing, that's no longer spoken. It's an Aboriginal Australian language, and I know you talk a bit about that. I can send you a link here on the channel. Stone Age Herbalist has also written a bit about this too, language diffusion in Australia, which is fascinating. There was a language. It exists in recorded written records and stuff like that. It's not really spoken anymore, I don't think, called, I'm probably going to butcher it, Mbabaram, I'm guessing. The Mbabaran language, used to be spoken in, let's see, near Cairns, Queensland. So there is, I don't know if he's still alive or not. We'll say he's alive. I think he's still alive. He's pretty old though. There is an Australian linguist who, what's his first name? Oh, that's bad. He wrote this book called Memoirs of a Field Worker. Let me see if I can pull that up. 1 second. Sorry. Memoirs of a Field Worker, which is this very interesting. Here's an Amazon link. If people, I can send you that if people are interested, maybe. It's sort of like accounts of trying to go find people who still speak languages to actually go record them, which is kind of a challenge, I will say, as somebody who's done kind of a very small version of that in my own right. To find the people is sometimes difficult. So he has this great bit in here about, he's trying to find, he's heard, he's heard about this language in Babaram, and he's trying to find some of the last speakers, right? Because sadly, a lot of these indigenous languages, Aboriginal languages, are not being passed on. And so you're like, well, you got to find the people who still speak it. It's a whole challenge. And he finds a speaker, and
I'm still here, but yeah.
Finds a speaker, and he learns that the word for dog in Mbabaram is dog.
Oh yeah. I was expecting that after that's set up.
Yeah, he thinks it's this whole big deal. I find now he recorded other bits of the language, which is great, right? It's for posterity, for linguistic science, great. But it's kind of you're like, oh, it's just dog. And so you kind of he starts running through kind of the basic linguist toolkit, which is, well, maybe the speaker's playing a game on me, because you'll sometimes have, as in anthropological fieldwork, sometimes people kind of want to test your mettle and see if you're really worthy of the task of studying them. That's, totally fine. Not that. Okay. Well, maybe it's a loan word from English, right? Like at this point, there's hardly any Mbabaran speakers left. And so maybe this is just like, hey, English has overtaken the speaker's original indigenous language, which can happen.
Oh, that's right? What I assumed it was.
Yeah, but it's actually not. No. So it's actually none of those things. So what happened it's a fascinating book. He goes through and he realizes that over time, so the original word for dog was, let me find it here. Sorry. Was gudaga. And what happened over time is the gu dropped off, because the gu kind of everywhere in the language, that prefix dropped away. And so then you had daga. And then what happened is a little bit later, the A's dropped away at the end of words. And then you had dag.
Oh.
And then the A just kind of changed to O, and it was dog. And so it's fascinating in its own way, but it's so not like this long lost ancestor of English, right? Like to say that this indigenous Aboriginal language is somehow related to English would be like, well, I don't know how.
If you had more evidence, maybe. I mean, no, maybe. But yeah.
Yeah, barring aliens or some sort of Atlantean theory, which I'm not saying isn't a thing, but it's hard to prove, right? Like it's really hard to prove that. But yeah, so you can get that. I mean, another example from Hawaiian, if you got time for one more example.
And then I have a question I want to ask.
Yeah, one more example. Sorry, I have so many. I have too many examples, too little time, but I don't want to. Hopefully, this is enlightening or interesting. The word for honey in Hawaiian is meli, and so you can make an argument if you wanted that meli is the word for honey in Hawaiian. So, hey, that's the same word for honey in ancient Greek. Have we found the long lost cousin of ancient Greek? Did the Greeks hop in boats and somehow go all the way to Hawaii? I mean, maybe they had some boats, right? Or maybe the Hawaiians were meeting the Greeks somewhere in the middle. No, actually, it's because when Christian missionaries were translating the Bible into Hawaiian, they needed a word for honey.
Oh, do they have bees? Do they even have honey?
Not really. No, not. I don't believe they're indigenous to the islands at all. And so they have them now because
Right.
they have pineapples now, and they have all these other things that are not indigenous to the. Yeah, pineapples don't come from Hawaii. I know. It's sorry to burst everyone's bubble there. They're
Very
not from Hawaii.
quickly
Yeah.
adopted into the culture, though. Many
Yes,
cases
totally.
of that.
Yeah. It turns out so like missionaries were translating the Bible into Hawaiian, and there's honey is a thing in the Bible. And so how do you talk about this honey thing to the Hawaiians? Well, maybe you start just like phonetically transcribing the word for honey into Hawaiian. Well, you have two choices. You can make it honey or honey, but honey means to flirt or act coy with someone, and honey means kiss. So we're just going to borrow in meli. And now meli is the word for honey in Hawaiian, and it's not because of some long lost ancestral connection between ancient Greek and Hawaiian. It's because they just borrowed it in from ancient Greek, but it wasn't even the Hawaiians doing it. It was the missionaries who were translating the Bible, and that now is the word for honey in Hawaiian. So anyhow, two fun examples there of just one is just random chance, and one is just like somebody decided at some point this is the new word, and it was widely adopted. So yeah.
Okay. So this question, what does he think about the altaic hypothesis?
I knew somebody was going to ask this one.
Yeah, this is probably the most commonly talked about. This is related to how related like Hungarian and other languages are together, steppe people languages. But go ahead.
Yeah. I have an answer that people will probably say is too diplomatic, but I at least have one foot left in. Not in academia per se, but I do have like linguistic colleagues and stuff. So I have to be I will be diplomatic, but I do have an opinion about this. Okay.
This question has a lot of politics around it.
And there's a lot of politics wrapped up into this, which is unfortunate because I think it obscures the linguistics.
Yeah. And it's a very good question that I can't interpret myself. And like, I know there's politics in it, so I'm not really sure.
So I will say that I think, so I'm not an expert in I'm not an expert in any of the language families that are supposedly theoretically part of the Altaic macro family, whatever you want to call that. With that caveat being said, I think so. I think that if there are similarities between what is it? It's supposedly that it's a macro family, supposedly part of Turkic, Mongolic, Tunguskic, Koreanic, Japonic, and some people say the Ainu. So again, the Ainu keep popping up as the mysterious connection to everything. If there are any connections between those languages, I think that they are likely areal, meaning they're probably because of this linguistic area feature kind of thing that can happen. So if you recall earlier in the live stream when we talked about the Pacific Northwest, where you have completely what we call genetically, quote unquote, in linguistics, genetically unrelated languages that end up sounding similar in some ways or sharing grammatical features because of contact. And I would say that Altaic, if it is, again, it says highly controversial there, if Altaic is real, and it might be, it would likely be not because necessarily these are some part of our earlier proto language family. It's probably because it's steppe cultures. And I mean, most of them are steppe cultures and highly nomadic. Yeah. And so you're going to have a lot of cultural contact, not a lot of people, fine, but you're moving around a lot. And you're probably going to have, the things that humans do, intermarriage, pillaging, conquering, all those things you do. Not that all of those are good things to do, but it does happen, right? It's part of human history. I think that would probably it's probably more of an aerial feature. And that is not maybe as succinct as some people would want it to be. And I have no real skin in the Altaic game, but because I don't have skin in it, I can theoretically view it slightly more neutrally. And I would say it's probably just aerial similarities, which actually I think accounts for a lot of things in when you have human languages that are not genetically related, but right next to each other or near each other that sound kind of act similar. It's probably just contact. That it's probably language.
So what is the root that makes people decide that it is a language family though?
It has to do with
what makes Indo-European a language family versus whatever's related to it?
So it has to do with the similarity in not just the words themselves, because again, words can be borrowed, and not just the grammar itself, because again, grammar and syntax to a certain extent can be borrowed. It has to do with a combination of looking at various languages, reconstructing them either through internal reconstructions or external reconstructions using textual evidence. You're looking at the earlier reconstructed forms and then comparing and contrasting those. And that has to do with
this is just going to get too technical.
It's going to get super technical really quickly because it has to do with things like frequency of certain kinds of sound change.
Got it.
It has to do with things like physical culture. Like, could they have conceivably come out of a common cultural ancestor?
At a certain level, it's arbitrary, though, right? So this is an example, right?
Yes. I mean, it is all
and then there's further distinctions like Germanic and like when it's a dialect and sub-languages versus different languages. It's it's not like it's not like genetics where you have something like, oh, these two things cannot interbreed, or they can interbreed, but they don't make viable offspring.
Right. It is,
so there's that's a non-arbitrarily different level. Whereas in this, it's always arbitrary. Some cases probably more clear than others. Definitely more clear than others, but it does have, like, in that ambiguity, you can create politics, especially with something that can be tied to like land ownership and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, an example that I know something about from knowing one of these languages and being able to understand the other is Norwegian. So I speak Norwegian. Hi alle sammen. Nordmenn der. Hi. So I don't know if you have Norwegian listeners, but
there's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple that I actually know of.
Yeah. So so like Norwegian and Swedish are mostly mutually intelligible. When spoken, they're spelled quite differently. And so I mean, I learned Norwegian later in life, so I don't have this native speaker. I mean, I speak it well, but I don't have this native speaker intuition. But like, I can talk to Swedes and I will speak Norwegian and they will speak Swedish, and we do mostly fine. There's some differences in little grammar differences, mostly just like vocabulary differences. But I mean, you can learn those in like a day, just walking around Stockholm. You can like, oh, okay, you say this for that, and you can interchange those. That's totally fine. And like, I can speak to Swedes fine, and they think I'm hilarious because I'm the American who speaks Norwegian, and that's funny to them. And
that is funny. That's funny to me.
It's objectively hilarious.
It's like when I got off the plane and when I went to Denmark, I got off the plane and I look like I do. I'm not even genetically Danish or whatever. I'm Irish, so it's in there.
You got some Norse in there, bud. Yeah,
I definitely. They got some Norse in my great grandmother or something.
Something.
But I got off the plane. I leave the airport, and immediately, like a South Asian guy, like an Indian or a Pakistani guy, like genetically, he comes up to me and he's talking in Viking, and I'm like, I just look at him like crazy. Like, it gave me immediate culture shock because I wasn't expecting him to be talking in the Viking language,
in Danish.
So I was just like thickest American accent, like, dude, I'm sorry, I'm American, and he's just like, then in perfect English back to me, he's like, oh yeah, sorry, you look Danish. I'm like, yeah, but no, I'm just English.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, those of us who speak Norwegian and or Swedish have a hard time understanding the Danes too. So, I mean, like, the Danes pride themselves on sounding so different from everyone else in Scandinavia. It's more different. Think of, I would say an analog is, if you think about the English that I'm speaking or Sam is speaking, which are mostly the same. We have some differences, I think, because you're very Yankee. I'm very West Coast.
Very much.
But think about like our broad American variety of English here. Compare it to somebody from Glasgow.
Oh God,
it's about that different. So you can understand.
So more different than US and UK English.
Yes, more different
in general.
But, I mean, you can understand people from Glasgow if you try hard, right? And if you learn the new rules of Scots, right? Like, you have to really learn it, but you can do it pretty quickly. They sound more different than they actually are, something like that. But yeah, like Danish, whereas in like Danish, because I speak Norwegian, I can read Danish fine. It's great. I can read Kierkegaard in the original, no problem. But then I try to talk to Danish friends in Danish and I give up. I'm like, let's just go in English, because I literally don't know what you just said to me, because Danish has all these completely unpredictable pronunciation changes and things like that. And so Norwegian is somewhere kind of weirdly in between Swedish and Danish. If you get Danes and Swedes trying to talk to each other, then there's all sorts of old imperial rivalries come out, and they get all, grumpy about soccer and hockey matches and things like that. So yeah.
That's funny.
But yeah, like, what is the difference between a dialect and a language? That's always kind of, it is always a question that needs to be asked. And I mean, to back to your earlier point, what we have here on screen, yes, it's a construction, fine, but it's a construction based on a lot of work and evidence. It is not genetic, like human genome type genetic. But I mean, there's some pretty good arguments for why these distinctions are there. So, which
okay.
It totally gets in the weeds, and we don't have time for that. So yeah,
we can do it some other time. But I think we can cut it off here, man. Thanks so much for coming on again. I appreciate it.
I hope it was interesting.
No, yeah, it is. It absolutely is. This is obviously the stuff I love. If I don't seem super excited, it's just because it's 11 p.m. at night.
Oh yeah, time difference.
But yeah, no, this is exactly, anytime you want to come on and talk about this stuff, a new topic, whatever, it's great. So yeah, have a good night, everybody. Like the video, subscribe if you're not, if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. But thanks,
everyone.